Major support for these broadcasts is provided by the CUNY TV Foundation, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's window company, Capital One Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Geneva Burns, Tomasi and Webster, M&T Bank, the Wyckoff Group, Chelsea Lighting, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional support is provided by Ackman Ziff Real Estate, AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi, USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International, NYC, Cushman and Wakefield, DDG, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Union Funding, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Hersha Hospitality Trust, Investors Bank, New Banks, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, John Katzimatidis, Red Apple Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, People's United Bank, Popular Community Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, and these friends.
You know, it's called Beirut. It's Lebanon. How does a kid who lives in Beirut, Lebanon, who then goes to Kuwait and he says, I like wine, who works for IBM, become probably one of the best vineyards in Long Island? I'm not sure. So he's going to tell a story today. I'm very lucky to have my friend Charles Massoud, who is the owner, the proprietor, and the winemaker emeritus, because your son is doing it.
That's correct, yes.
Paumanok Vineyards, and we have a variety of them today. So tell me about, tell me about your grandparents. This is a really interesting story,
It is actually. Every time I reflect on it, I feel so fortunate for having had that opportunity to contrast and compare. My grandparents obviously were born in the 1800s. My dad was born in
1894, if I remember.
My father was born in 1896, but my grandmother, I think she was born around 1865 or something like that, because she died in 1970. She lived to be 105 years old.
So where'd she come from?
A small village. Lebanon is this big mountain on the Mediterranean, which is it's a very pretty scene. And she was in one of those little villages where my father was born.
And what were her parents doing there?
Her parents, I don't know, but I know that my grandfather was a stonemason. They would basically, most of the houses are built out of stone. And so they had to basically sculpt the stones and to be able to stack them and make...
So that was your grandfather, and your grandmother was...
And my grandmother, I know nothing about her.
You told me your dad was, at 14, he went into a kitchen helper.
Right. He left the village at 14 and he went down to Beirut and he walked. And the distance is like about 15 miles. But when he told me that he walked, I couldn't comprehend it at the time. But and then he had already some relatives in the city, and he went to work initially as a kitchen helper. And over the years, he and his brothers worked very hard, saved money. They were smart. They started a business. They had what it was compared to a catering place. They would basically cater for parties, for embassies and things like that. And they started a pastry shop and then food and wine importing business to go along with it. And so early on, therefore, they were exposed to a lot of the things which we benefited from. Across the street from them was my maternal grandfather's business, which was more, in terms of clothing and more commodities as opposed to food. And my mother tells me the story that one day, here she was sitting at home, and my maternal grandfather and his wife, no, uh, the other way around. My paternal grandparents come in with my father and his brother
Right, and they
in
say,
tow.
we're going to...
And they came, and the expression was to ask for her hand, you know. And she tells me that she was hiding behind the curtain trying to figure out which ones of the two,
She wanted to...
right, that they were talking about. And so, and she tells me that she actually liked my uncle. But after they left, they told her it was the other guy. But being a good girl, in those days, it was expected that you do what your parents would tell you that they thought was the best thing for them. And so happily, she goes and gets married with my father. And lo and behold, you know, they spent more than 50 years together.
Now, but
very happily.
But your father was a distributor, he was a caterer, and then your brother, the entrepreneur, we have to say, right?
Right,
Your
my older brother.
goes to Switzerland?
Yeah, he was 18 years old. My father and his brother had split the business by then, and my oldest brother talks my parents in sending him to Switzerland to study hotel management in Lausanne, you know, very prestigious school in Lausanne. 1948. 1948, I mean, you didn't hear of anybody going to study anywhere, let alone abroad to Switzerland. And so here this guy goes to Switzerland, comes back, convinces my parents that they should convert we had a beautiful house up in the mountains where we used to spend the summer. Convinces them to convert it into a hotel.
66 rooms, you said.
66 bedrooms we started with, and we had that hotel for a number of years. And they did very well with it, surprisingly. So it was a good idea. And
so when you were growing up, since you have the French, we'll get to that in a second, were you a connoisseur of wine? That's like this one's that's being at La Bernardin, you know?
Right, that's being served at Le Bernardin with their tasting menu today. But, you know, at the time, whenever we sat down to eat, and we lived in Beirut, and we went to school and came back for lunch. We used to have lunch at home and then go back to school. School was like 10 minutes walk away. And, but whenever we sat to eat, we had wine for lunch. We were not allowed to drink a lot, but we were allowed to taste, you know. So we grew up developing a flavor for wine as a food. I mean, for me, wine is a food item. If you pour me some wine and I taste it, I want to reach out to something to eat with it because right away I feel the connection, you know. So I don't drink except for dinner. And I think it's a wonderful thing because there's synergy between food and wine. But that developed as we were growing up.
So tell me about growing up in Beirut, because your brother, who was older than you, because in 48 you were only 4 years old.
I was 4 years old, yeah.
Okay.
We had such a childhood where we were totally carefree, and I was in the Boy Scouts, and we used to go and do camps and things like that. And as we were growing up, you know, I never really worked until much later. But we lived around the business. You know, our house wasn't far from...
Right, so you were always at the hotel or
right.
You were doing something
yeah.
there. Now, you tell me that you finished high school and then you subsequently...
well, actually, I had enrolled to go to AUB, American University of Beirut, and the day, in engineering, I wanted to study engineering at the time. The day where the school was starting, I got sick with hepatitis. And at the time, my uncle was our family doctor. He told me, you're going to have to be in bed for 6 weeks until you fully recover and your liver has had a chance to rebuild. And, you know, after 6 weeks, it was too late to...
So that one semester was gone?
Yeah, and so I dropped out basically from... I never joined, actually, the School of Engineering. And that year was relatively wasted. You know, I enrolled in another school for the following semester just to keep myself busy, but I didn't do much with that. And the following year, I was kind of rudderless, you know. But I put it to good use in that I applied to a school in France, in Paris, École des Hautes Études Commerciales, it was called, where I was accepted. And for my luck, in 1965, I moved over to Paris, and I spent 3 years over there.
But in those 3 years, you had that interesting summer internship at Pine Street at a bank called Chemical Bank, right?
That's right, 1967. Here I come. I land in New York at JFK.
You're 23 years of age, New York. First time in New
Yeah.
York, right?
First time in New York. I take, it used to be called the Cary bus that took you from JFK all the way to 42nd Street. And I stayed for a couple of weeks at...
The Vanderbilt Y on 49th Street.
Exactly.
49th Street.
Exactly.
Right?
So I stayed there.
And then you ended up in Astoria. I mean, which, you know, wasn't for Lebanon. It was more of the
There
Greek
was a young
community.
man who was in the same program where I was at Chemical Bank. He told me, you know, I have this apartment in Queens that I'm going to be leaving. Would you be interested in renting it? I said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go check it out. So I went, spoke to the owner. So I took it over from him, and I moved to Astoria. But the interesting part is that when I was at the Y, there was another gentleman who was working at Westinghouse. He used to come, and whenever he visited the city to do work at Westinghouse headquarters was like in the Pan Am building next door, and it was convenient for him. So one day I was going up the elevator. He happened to be there. He looked at me. He says, "Where do you come from?" So I told him. I said, "I'm from Beirut." He said, "I thought so. You look," and so we started talking. We had dinner together that day. And he asked me, what is it that I'm doing and what is it that I wanted to do? I said, you know, I feel like I want to continue to do my MBA here, and I would like to go do some interviewing. He said,
You thought of Harvard, right?
He said, which school are you looking at? I said, I think I would like to try the Harvard because they have a very well-known business school. He said, have you considered Wharton? I said, what's that? And he said, you know, this is a very reputable school, especially if you want to be in finance. So the next day I go to Chemical Bank and I ask, I said, have you guys heard of a school called Wharton? He said, you're talking about the MBA school? I said, yes. He said, oh, well, yeah, this is the prime school for finance. So I was intrigued by that whole idea. So I took a weekend, a couple of days, the weekend, went down to Philadelphia to visit Philadelphia, went to Penn, had my interview at Wharton, and the next thing they accepted me. And when I finished my school in Paris in '68, I came over to Philadelphia and I did my MBA at Wharton.
And you told me you loved Philadelphia.
I have very fond memories from Philadelphia for many reasons. Penn was intellectually a very challenging place. I found it fascinating, you know, because you really had the opportunity to mix it up with a lot of very interesting people. And I enjoyed Wharton. I learned a great deal.
And then you met this young woman who came from Germany in Wharton.
Yeah, right.
How'd you meet Ursula?
When I went to Philadelphia, I joined the International House, as it was called, and we had a club, the International Students, and I was the treasurer of that club. And one night we were having our meeting, and then Ursula comes with a friend of hers.
She was going to school in Chestnut?
Chestnut Hill College. It was on the main line in Philadelphia. She comes with her friend, Maria Bull was her name. She was from Nigeria. So Maria and Ursula are organizing this international cultural affair at Chestnut Hill. And so they came over, gave us a presentation. They were looking for some help. How can we help them, since we are international student society, with their thing. So I sat next to her, and then I told her, you know, I'm sorry, I don't think we have what you're looking for, but I'd like to get your phone number. And so we started dating after that, and I think we got married finally in 1971.
So wait, you finished undergraduate school in
Paris.
In Paris. So you come to Wharton for 2 years.
Right.
You meet Ursula, but you get married later on. And then while you're at Wharton, many people have interviews, and you have an interview with a company with IBM, International Business Machines.
That's right.
And what was the job?
You know, IBM had offices in the Middle East, and the regional headquarters was in Beirut, and they recruited me to go there in the marketing department.
To work in Beirut?
To work in Beirut.
And your parents were still there?
Oh yeah, the whole family was still there. You know, by then we had sold the hotel up in the mountains and built a much nicer place down in the city on the beach. So it was a hotel and a beach club and a restaurant.
And your brother was
Uh, by then, I had two brothers who were
In the
involved.
hotel.
The oldest one had actually moved on his own for a while, and the second oldest was running it for a number of years.
So now you're in Beirut,
Right.
and then what happens?
And so I spent 1 year at IBM in Beirut, completed my training into IBM technology and all that, and was ready to begin to do something in the field, as we called it. And I became aware of an opening in the state of Kuwait. You know, from here, they're all like over there, but when you are in Beirut, at least in 1970, Kuwait looked like the end of the world. You know, it was a different country, different culture. And I said to Ursula, I said, you know, before we settle down, we should go and explore while we can do it. And this sounds exciting. We're going into the unknown and test.
Now, had you ever been to Kuwait?
No, no. It was one of those things. You know, want to go explore the unknown.
So when
look
do you
for
move
a different
to?
culture.
So when do you move to Kuwait?
We went to Kuwait in the spring of 1971.
So it's spring of 1971. You're 27 years of age, and while you're in Kuwait, the problem was your palate for red wine, or white wine, or rosé.
Right.
You couldn't have because Kuwait had a little question about
Right, you know,
drinking.
The joke that we used to make in Kuwait is that Kuwait is so dry, wherever they drilled for water, they found oil. But that was not the dryness that we talk about. It's also a dry country in the sense that there is prohibition. You can't, they don't sell alcohol. In fact, there is more alcohol being drunk over there than anywhere I know. But what was on the black market was mostly...
It's like Prohibition days, the same problem. Whenever
It's amazing, you know, it's...
So what happens? You become a distiller? I mean,
No,
as when
I
I was
wanted-
joking with you, you know, if you did it in the bathtub with your
Right.
feet, but
yeah, I wanted to drink wine, so that wasn't available on the black market. So I started asking my colleagues at IBM and my customers, what do you guys do here? I feel like I want to have a drink. They said, well, it's very easy. We all make wine at home. We can show you how. As long as you don't sell it, you won't get in trouble. So they taught us how to make wine and beer. And I made beer. It was terrible. I never touched it again. But wine, surprisingly, turned out very good. And so we started making wine.
So where do you get the grapes?
Well, one of the reasons why Kuwait is such a large importer of grape juice is that people buy grape juice in the supermarket and they re-ferment it at home.
Okay.
So it's not directly from grape, but it was very good, surprisingly. We would organize these tasting to compare who had the better wine and things like that. It was fun to go with the program. But in our case, what helped us further is that Ursula, my wife, she comes from a winemaking family in Germany. Her maternal grandfather was a vintner. And so wherever we visited, whenever we went to Germany on vacation or for holidays, we mingled for that side of the family, you know, going down in the cellar, bringing in a pitcher of wine to have with dinner, seeing them crush or whatever. And little by little, we started asking questions and we became more interested. And one day we said, gee, you know, that's not a bad lifestyle. So we told them, what do you think? We were thinking that when I would retire from IBM, which would have been like 4 years ago had I stayed.
Right, but you're in Kuwait. When do you come to America?
We came to the United States in 1978. You know, from 71 through 78, we spent 7 years. We had a great time over there. You know, the beaches were beautiful.
In Kuwait.
In Kuwait. I used to go get oysters to fish the pearls out of the oysters. You know, they were Baroque pearls, but, you know, we have quite a collection. We used to harpoon fish underwater. The place was...
So you had a wonderful time.
Oh,
so at 78, now the kid from Beirut now goes to Stamford, Connecticut?
Stamford, Connecticut.
Oh, I mean, very...
Well, the thing is that by then we had thought about the possibility of going back to Germany if and when I would retire from IBM, like, you know, 30 years down the road. And we ran it by some of her parents over there, you know, cousins and uncles, and said, what do you think? We're thinking, oh, you don't want to do that. It's a hard life. And we say, yeah, maybe they're right. We shouldn't do that. But then you look around, they are living in beautiful houses. They're driving BMWs and Mercedes.
So you're here in 78, and it's 1979, and you tell me, I don't know how this happened, you and Ursula go out to a place that really had started their first vineyard in '73.
Actually,
with the Hargraves, right?
That's right. I mean, here we are in October of '79. I'm sitting in front of the fireplace reading the Sunday New York Times with a glass of wine in my hand, and I stumble on this article writing about wine, grapes being grown and wine being made on Long Island. So I called Ursula over. I said, take a look. We may not have to wait. They're doing it in our backyard. So January of '80, we take a drive. I didn't know at that time, for some reason, that Long Island was really long island, you know, very long. We had gone as far as Jericho to buy our golden retriever at one time, and that was it, you know, and I thought Long Island would kind of end soon after that. It turns out to be a much, much longer place. So by the time we finally got to Cutchogue, then we discovered what it was, and we spent a day with Alec and Louisa Hargrave, and, you know, I came back home like inebriated with the idea that it's all doable, you know. And so,
With real grapes as opposed to grape juice.
right. And so we spent the next 3 years visiting wineries, visiting wine regions, talking to people. And the beauty of this is that in this business, when you go talk to a vintner or a winemaker, you ask a question, they give you more answers than you want. And so the next visit, you ask more intelligent questions. So it was, you were learning very fast and getting much deeper into it.
So it's these 3 years, and you said to me that I wanted to buy property, I didn't want to buy property, back and forth. And 1983, what happens? How do you find the potato farm?
Well, we were about to give up, and then initially we were looking in Cutchogue because Alec Hargrave, who everybody thought was God at the time, said Cutchogue is the sunniest spot in the state of New York. And, you know, we took that as gospel. And so we couldn't afford anything around Cutchogue because the prices had started going up. But we found this place in Aquebogue, which was like maybe 10 miles down the road from there. So we said, nah, maybe it's not so bad.
So you buy this place in '83, which has a small little house,
Yes.
which you've expanded, a barn, and you're still working for IBM in Stamford.
Right. That's right.
Schlepping into the city. When do you start to put the grapes out?
Well, actually, we were so crazy in those days that we planted it before we even closed on the property. The owner had agreed to let us do so. We planted 14 acres in May, but we closed on the property in the following October. And so we had one of our colleagues, the late Ray Blum, he passed unfortunately a couple of years ago. He did the planting for us and he did the vineyard maintenance for us. And I was watching and learning from him. So the second year I took over from him. And so for about 9 years, from '83 to '92, weekends, vacations, holidays.
Now, your first vintage was what, '89, you said to me?
The first vintage with the name Paumanok was produced in 1989 at Bridgehampton Winery, it was called at the time.
Right, so you sent your grapes over there.
We gave them our grapes and they make the wine for us, but it was produced at their winery.
So what happens in 1993?
1992, actually.
1992.
You know, in 1991 already, my wife and I had come to the conclusion that we need to do something different because neither the vineyard was getting enough time nor my career at IBM was getting enough time. They were both suffering. So we had to choose, we continue with one or the other. We can't do both, otherwise we're going to fail at both. And so I had come to the conclusion that I probably will leave IBM, and it was a good time because both our sons were finishing their schools. You know, like the youngest one was finishing grammar school, the middle one was finishing high school, the old one was already at the university. And so, for my luck, I think it was December 12, 1991, I was leaving Friday.
Early retirement.
IBM comes up with this wonderful deal that if we would leave, they would actually pay us some money and they would give us the bridge to retirement. And I made it barely by 6 months. Had I been 6 months younger, I wouldn't have qualified. So I went home. I drove from, we were on Maiden Lane at the time. I drove from Maiden Lane to Long Island, and Ursula drove from Stamford with the children to meet me there, as we did every weekend. And we had dinner, and after dinner I took my briefcase, opened it, read that package that had come out over it wasn't internet in those days, we used to call it office systems. And we printed it, I read it, And I said to my wife, why don't you read it? This is too good to be true. She read it, and she came to the same conclusion.
So you went into the business full-time in '92. But the interesting thing you said is that one of the things that helped you was when Sherry Lehman tasted your wine.
Yeah, I mean, we had just started selling the wine that was made for us at the time at BuildingNY, and that wine was really beautiful. It was a great Chardonnay. Ursula was beginning to show it at various places, and we decided to go to the city. And you know, the one place that was really still is one of the better stores in the city was Sherry Lehman. So we went and we met with Michael Aaron. And Michael initially was very polite, and you know, he received us very nicely, but obviously he wasn't really very eager to take the wine. However, before we left,
He tasted.
He tasted it, and then all of a sudden he said, you know what? Governor Carey just passed this law allowing New York stores to show New York wines in the store. Would you like to do a tasting? We said, but of course. And so we went from being on the way to be going outside to finally having our opening day at Sherry Lehman, which was a great way to introduce ourselves.
Now, you've been involved on the board of Paumanok Bay Medical Center. You've been the head of the Long Island Wine Council, Bridgehampton National Bank. And more important is you have 3 sons who are in the business today.
Yes.
One who went to Wharton, who then worked as an investment banker. That's your son,
Kareem. He's taken over completely our winemaking program.
Right.
I've become the
emeritus. You're the emeritus. And then you have your next son.
My next son, Salim, helps me a great deal with administrative work, and you know, he helps his brothers when they need him. And then the youngest one, Nabil, manages our vineyard. So I think everyone has a piece of the business, but you know, they go either way because it's seasonal. You know, in the summertime, the bulk of the work is in the vineyard. In the fall, the bulk of the work is in the winery. And so you would see us moving this way and that way depending on who has more work that needs more help. But it is an interesting business. I say our children are retiring us, which is a great thing. You know, that's what I'm really hoping for.
But since I was at the vineyard, you're not being retired. You're there, you keep active. You brought me 4 wonderful wines, okay, you know, La Bernardin, and the others are sold in fine wineries.
Yeah.
And also, you're the closest vineyard when you get off main road.
That's
so
true.
you can't miss it.
Yeah.
And the oysters are on Saturday. So I know when Mrs. Stoller and I come to visit, she will be very happy with the oysters.
That would be great, actually.
Okay.
These are locally grown oysters, and you know, they're absolutely...
But no pearls.
No.
No pearls. But I'd like
You know,
to...
by the way, the oysters that contains the pearls, they're really not good to eat.
Oh, good. But I'd like to say from the kid from Beirut to become probably one of the best, if not the best, vineyards in Long Island. Thank you for being here today.
Well, it was my pleasure, actually. I enjoyed it a great deal.
And we'll open up a bottle in a minute.